And greetings to everybody. Welcome to CPR's annual meeting. As we gather across the globe and across the internet, we are reminded as we commence this annual meeting of where we were last year in St. Petersburg and all that has transpired in between. How challenging and consequential this past year has been for so many in our community and beyond. There have been so many lives lost as a result of the pandemic. There has been so much pain caused by economic distress. And there has been so much conflict. Perhaps some of it necessary and productive, but other conflict has simply been destructive. In coming together this afternoon and evening, wherever you are, and over the next several days, it is in the area of conflict that we again have a chance to lead as a community. Our focus on conflict is firmly on the business community. But make no mistake, business conflict, if not properly tempered, can bring the destruction of purpose and relations that we have seen in other arenas. Indeed, as a student of, litigator, manager, and client in business conflict over the last 30 plus years, I am well aware of the way that passions and a rigid conviction in the rightness of our causes can cloud our common interests and complicate the discovery of common ground. What is inspiring about this community, gathering here over the next several days, is our dedication toward finding the innovations and approaches that help reveal common ground in the midst of conflict. In so doing, our work in the business community can serve as a model for discovering common ground in the world at large. It is with that spirit of finding ways to promote less conflict and more purpose that I want to open our annual meeting. Let me begin with a quick reminder to some and a quick introduction to others on who CPR is. CPR is made up of two divisions, the CPR Institute and CPR Dispute Resolution, both focused on managing conflict to enable purpose. The CPR Institute is the membership part of the organization, focused on driving a global prevention and dispute resolution culture. We convene committees of members to share best practices and generate tools and resources for dispute prevention and resolution. We host global and regional events such as this to enable networking, the sharing of ideas, and bringing together leaders on best practices. We publish a monthly journal on topics of interest, and we otherwise advocate for expanding the capacity of dispute prevention and resolution around the globe. CPR Dispute Resolution, the other part of our organization, provides the parties leading edge services to resolve disputes by leveraging the resources generated by the CPR Institute. It has deep experience in dispute resolution, a deep bench of neutrals spanning the globe, and deep expertise across a variety of subject areas. As we come together this afternoon, I'm proud to tell you that the state of CPR, I've always wanted to be able to say that, the state of CPR continues to be innovative, productive, and virtual, but very real. The heart of our work comes from our committees and task forces. And just as a sampling of some of the work we've done over the last year in the area of arbitration, we've developed through a task force a model procedural order for how to conduct remote video arbitration proceedings. We launched a fast-track set of rules for helping accelerate resolution during this time when accelerated resolution is so critical in arbitration. In the area of mediation, we pulled together a concurrent mediation arbitration protocol to increase the chances that resolution can be found. We provided training to mediators on how to conduct Zoom mediations. We convened Workers' Council, Defense Council, in-house counsel, and our Employment Disputes Committee and examined the rise of COVID-19 related employment claims and the ways in which parties might approach those. And as we all move to working in different environments, in closer spaces, we developed a series called Conflict in Closed Spaces, where we examined in 3 different programs how to manage the loss of boundaries in our workspaces, how to drive a positive work culture in the virtual workspace, and how to maintain personal stability. At the same time, our industry committees convened to examine issues particular to their communities. We also launched remotely and with the help of Arbitration Place in each instance, our series of international events. Our European conference focused on learning and adapting in a VUCA world. VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. At our Canada conference, we have panels focused on pursuing relief in uncertain times against potentially insolvent entities. And last month, our Latin American conference spanned 2 days with a variety of panels from how to engage with dispute resolution boards to looking at the ethical standards for mediators under the Singapore Convention. By the way, I invite you all to join us as we hold our 4th annual international mediation competition, again remotely, with 15 law school teams from around the globe. All the while, and reflecting the vibrancy of our community, we've been delighted to welcome new members, including Microsoft, Deckert, Teva, O'Melveny, Azai, Nichols Caster, Massaman Avogados, and others. Thank you to those and to our current members for your support and engagement. Now, as we begin the new year, we're focused on the imperatives ahead. The imperatives ahead are threefold: ensuring all the available talent is being deployed for dispute prevention and resolution, continuing to provide innovative tools and resources for dispute prevention and resolution, and partnering in preventing and resolving more disputes. Let me begin by zeroing in on our commitment to increasing the diversity of those who serve as mediators and arbitrators in resolving conflict. Like so many institutions, we need to do better. We are striving to do better. Our panel of neutrals is now 38% diverse. Our new recruits this fiscal year have been 68% diverse, and our selections have been 38% diverse. We still have much to do. This work is so critical to the legitimacy of dispute resolution. It makes dispute resolution more accessible to more people and enables better decision-making. In keeping with that commitment, last year, we launched a new diversity commitment, calling upon the corporate community, the law firm community, and ourselves to take concrete steps to enhance the prospects for selecting diverse neutrals. One of the panels on Friday will discuss this commitment. The commitment asks the corporate community to include diverse neutrals among any list they propose for mediations or arbitrations. Ask them to emphasize to their outside counsel and counterparties to do the same and to track the selection of diverse neutrals. It asks the law firm community to emphasize this in their discussions and counseling with their clients. And we at CPR undertake to include 30% diverse neutrals in any slate we propose. Thus far this fiscal year, we've been able to do that 80% of the time. Again, we're looking to do better. I want to thank those who have signed on already to our diversity commitment and ask others to join us in the conversation, from AkzoNobel to Bayer, ConocoPhillips, Eversource, Foley Hoag, General Motors, Hogan Lovells, KPMG, Norton Rose, Shell, Semito Vant, Visa, White and Case, and others. Thank you. Second, I want to zero in on those innovative tools and resources that, with your help, our membership community, we're looking to continue to be responsive to the needs and issues that come up in dispute prevention and resolution, and provide the necessary resources to meet those needs. We have an ambitious slate of projects, from updating the protocol for disclosure and discovery and arbitration, to managing the landscape of exceptions to confidentiality in mediation, to launching new administered rules for employment arbitration, to mitigating risk in life science transactions and beyond. Please join us in working on these important projects. One of the most important projects that we are working on will be advocating for and elevating the discussion on dispute prevention. Conflict is inevitable in any set of relationships, and it is certainly true of business relationships. Dispute prevention recognizes this reality and seeks to put in place mechanisms to help identify that conflict early on and in real time, and to find solutions that maximize the value of the business relationship before the conflict hardens into a value-draining dispute. The benefits include maintaining a focus on corporate purpose, preserving cooperative working relationships, better ensuring business continuity, and has been shown with empirical research in this regard, saving costs for everybody involved. And so, as we did with prior pledges at CPR to promote alternative dispute resolution, we now again want to take the lead in taking the next step forward and launching a new pledge to call upon companies and other entities to commit to being open to deploying dispute prevention mechanisms, be it escalation clauses, the use of alliance management, engaging third-party dispute prevention neutrals. We'll actually have a panel on simulating the use of third-party neutrals for that purpose tomorrow, and other mechanisms to again enable that early identification of conflict and preventing it from escalating into the dispute. You will hear more about this throughout the conference. I invite you all to join us in elevating the discussion and the focus on dispute prevention and proclaiming your support for it. We will be back in touch to sign you up. Now, let me turn to the fabulous agenda we have over the next several days. But before reviewing that agenda, I too want to add my thanks, as Ellen did, to those who've made this event possible, from Arbitration Place, to our sponsors, to the co-chairs of this event, and to our staff led by Ellen. This has been a team sport. Thank you all. Soon, we will be joined by our keynote speaker. Then, later on this evening, we'll have our annual awards ceremony. It will be a special event as we recognize stars in our community. Before that, by the way, I skipped over and do not want to skip our Rising ADR Award ceremony, in which we'll be recognizing those in the next generation who will be leaders in ADR. And finally, as we mentioned at the outset, we look forward to playing games with you later on in a virtual trivia contest and engaging in some smack talk, hopefully. So please let us know if you're able to attend. Tomorrow, kicking off the event for us will be Carlos Hernandez, former CEO of Fluor and co-chair of this annual meeting. Then we'll have a very robust panel discussion on managing bet the company crises. We'll be joined over lunch by our special guest, General Jim Mattis. The afternoon will bring us a panel on the case for conflict prevention and risk management, followed by that simulation that I mentioned on using third-party dispute prevention neutrals, and then our ethics discussion on the ethics of neutrals wearing different hats as we move between dispute prevention and resolution. Ellen will bring us closing remarks tomorrow. Then tomorrow evening, we have a special entertainment guest, Reed Umstead of The Voice, who will serenade us all. Finally, on day 3, our board member, Kim Phillips, General Counsel of Global Litigation at Shell, will open up for us. We'll have a panel focusing on training dispute prevention neutrals. Then we'll have a discussion on best practices for addressing and resolving workplace disputes, hot topics in ADR, and finally, that panel that I referenced on implementing CPR's diversity commitment. Closing remarks will be given by the event's other co-chair, Scott Partridge, General Counsel of Bayer. Now, allow me to introduce our keynote speaker, Dana Bash. As many of you probably know, Dana is CNN's chief political correspondent and co-anchor of State of the Union. Dana has been covering the state of our union for over 2 decades and has had a first-row seat to conflict and disruption across a variety of events, from Hurricane Katrina to the September 11th attacks, and most recently, I know you've seen her, she's been everywhere covering political events in our country, from the political debates to town halls to other issues and events as they arise. Dana is the winner of the National Press Foundation's Saul Tashoff Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism. In keeping with our tradition at CPR's annual meeting, we look forward to learning from Dana about conflicts in other arenas. So please join me in welcoming Dana Bash.
Thank you so much, Alan. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. Where do I even start? First of all, it's very odd that you would choose somebody in Washington to talk about conflict, because everything is just rainbows and unicorns down here. There's really nothing to talk about. There are no conflicts. Everything's fine. Just kidding, obviously. I'm very honored to be here. Alan, thank you for inviting me. I want to give a shout out to Norman and Sandra Waxman, who I'm sure are on, who I've known for a very, very, very long time through Alan's sister, because this is, kind of the way it works. I also have worked with Alan's brother-in-law I still work with him, with Ted Barrett, who's one of my closest friends as well. He and I covered the Capitol and Congress for decades together, and he still is doing that. So I might reference him because I talked to him before coming on with you. But I know we're going to open it up to questions, and I want to leave the vast majority of the time to do that, because I think that will be most interesting to you all for me to answer the questions that you have. But just starting broadly, I have been at CNN for a very long time. This is my 27th year, maybe 27th or 28th year. And so it was a very different world when I started at CNN. And when I first started, I was actually a producer on the weekend shows, and that's where I met Alan's brother, Deborah. But I then eventually went to the newsroom and to the assignment desk, and pretty early on began covering Congress. And I started out in a really partisan time covering the impeachment of Bill Clinton. That was really when I started spending most of my time on Capitol Hill. So given that, it's going to sound funny what I'm going to say to you, which is that aside, when I first began really walking the halls of Congress, it was so different in terms of negotiations, in terms of deal making, in terms of conflict resolution, which is what they are supposed to do with the art of legislating every single day in the United States Congress. That's what they're elected to do. And it was different in that, name your topic, whether it was even immigration reform or Medicare, getting a prescription drug benefit on Medicare, or the annual budget negotiations. There were always conflicts. There were always battles, partisan battles, but there were also meetings, there were also discussions, there were also negotiations. And I like to say that in those days, we as reporters have the benefit of walking the halls of Congress and being able to have a lot of access. And what we used to do is find the rooms where they were negotiating across party lines for the most part, and stand outside for hours and hours and hours, and days and days, sometimes weeks and weeks. And at the end of that, the expectation was that there would be a deal. We didn't know the specifics of it. We didn't know who would give on what. We didn't know what the kind of magic moment was that would allow them to reach that compromise on whatever the issue is that they were negotiating. But the expectation was that there would be some deal. Then, even pre-Donald Trump, frankly, things started to change rapidly. There were fewer meetings, there were fewer negotiations. And it wasn't about, there were really no halls to stand in because there were no rooms where these meetings were happening. And it happened, the idea of a compromise happened less and less and less. It did happen on kind of what I like to call low-hanging fruit, on issues that people agree on. Not that they're easy, but the agriculture bill, the defense bill, where there are so many common interests that there was no question that there would be a deal. But it started to change, and there are lots of reasons why it started to change. Again, this is pre-Trump. We can get into Trump and how that has affected things in a bit. I'll give you a couple of reasons. Actually, maybe more than a couple. Number one, lawmakers stopped moving their families to Washington, D.C. Why does that matter? Well, first of all, politically, the reason, you probably have all guessed this, is because a lot of lawmakers started to get dinged, started to get attacked, even lost their seats because they lost touch with their district or their home state because they spent too much time in Washington, which was in a lot of cases a fair criticism. But for the most part, lawmakers have taken that and gone to an extreme where they don't move their families here. It used to be that that used to happen regularly. And what that means is that people are racing home to get home, understandably, on a Thursday to see their family, not coming to Washington, and they're not scheduling votes until Monday night or Tuesday. So the lawmakers aren't here in Washington for very long. They can't get to know each other across party lines as people, as humans who have common interests that they wouldn't even think about or know about because they don't communicate the way that they used to in the olden days when I started. So that's one of the dynamics. And another is money. And there are two parts of the fundraising and the money in politics that I think have contributed to the partisanship. Number one is what I just mentioned, which is people are not engaging with one another as much because they have to raise such huge sums of money for their reelections. And in the House, it's constant because they run every 2 years. So as soon as they win, they've got another campaign. And so instead of potentially taking time to have dinner with somebody across the aisle, have a cocktail with somebody across the aisle, lawmakers are racing out of the building in order to go to a fundraiser, to go to a building because you can't raise money. It's illegal to raise money on the Capitol grounds. So go across the street to a party headquarters to dial for dollars. And so it takes away from getting to know you time. So that's another reason. Another, when it comes to money, and this is something that it never really occurred to me until a senior person actually in the Trump campaign said this to me over the last campaign. And it really makes a lot of sense, which is the following. There is so much emphasis on small dollar donors. What does that mean? On people who can give $1, $2, $5. And there are lots of reasons for that, because the laws, the election laws, as you all know, there's a maximum. Any individual can't give more than a certain amount. And so campaigns and candidates like to go back to these people, like to have the small dollar donors, because they can go back to them time and time again. But it also is because it connects them to the grassroots, and it's a talking point. Look, I didn't just get money from corporation X or Y. I got money from all of these people who only gave, $21, which is a great form of democracy. It absolutely is. But what this Trump campaign official said to me is that it forces or incentivizes the campaigns to appeal to the grassroots. But in a lot of cases, most cases, the quote unquote grassroots is the extreme of the party. So you see the fundraising notes that go out and the solicitations, it's about the most extreme issue. We're going to build a wall, which might not be extreme, but they take it to another level, and you actually get the same sort of thing on the liberal side as well. And so that helps contribute to the gulf that is widened in politics. Another is gerrymandering. And obviously this is an issue for the House, not the Senate, but it has gotten so much worse in the almost 3 decades since I've been covering Washington. And what that means is if that a district is carved out to be a safe Democratic seat, the Democrat in that seat won't have an incentive to work across the aisle, because they're not going to get, there's no chance that they're going to get beaten by a Republican. The thing that they're worried about is getting beaten by a fellow Democrat. So that is a primary challenge that they're worried about. And it's obviously the very same dynamic on the Republican side. So if you're worried about your left flank, if you're a Democrat, your right flank, if you're a Republican, you're not going to look towards the middle for the most part. So that's another contributor. And then of course, internet, social media, the echo chamber through which so many people, even more so in the past 4 or 5 years, have gotten their information, have consumed information, which allows so much, not only misinformation, which we can talk about in a minute, but also they're just hearing the same thing back and forth, and people are sharing the same information and not getting other points of view, which they might not agree with, but at least they can listen to. What I was started to say is that you all deal with this all the time in your profession, and I'm sure as part of this organization, which is how do you deal with a conflict? How do you get to a mediation? How do you get to a compromise? And the most basic is spending time understanding where the other person is coming from. What do they need? What are their biggest concerns that they need, either because of their political station, because of the push and pull of whatever their goal is, where they come from geographically, and taking the time to understand that and to know that is such a huge hurdle in politics as well, a huge hurdle. Now, the interesting thing is that the old way that it used to be that I described at the beginning, that's where Joe Biden comes from. That is his DNA. That's what he talked about on the campaign trail, and it wasn't just spin. I watched him do it in the halls when he was a U.S. senator. The question now, though, is whether it is possible to recapture those times, recapture that dynamic. And we don't know the answer to that yet. And that is one of the things that is going to be fascinating to me watching as this very, very new administration goes forward. The first test, the first exhibit of that is going to be on the stimulus bill, where, of course, negotiations 101, everybody here knows this. The bill that he put out is huge. It's pie in the sky. It's $1.9 trillion, because why negotiate with yourself? You got to go as high as you can, knowing that you're going to have to come down a little bit. Having said that, or maybe even a lot. Having said that, there are a lot more people, there are a lot more Democrats, first in the House and even in the Senate, who are elected as progressives and who are elected to not compromise, to say, we have it, we have this power, we fought for this power, and we need to stand up for what we believe in, and we need to go for the whole loaf, not half a loaf. And how he bridges that is going to be one of the hallmarks of his presidency, and whether or not he can deliver on a lot of the promises, because there are dueling promises from the Biden world. Another just anecdote I'll tell you to give hope that that interpersonal relationship does still exist more in the Senate than in the House. One example, there are groups where pockets where this exists. The women in the Senate, which is a bigger number than ever, less so because of COVID, but beforehand, there was a hard and fast once a month dinner with female US senators, Republicans and Democrats. No recordings, no notes, no staff, off the record, lots of wine, and the women would get together and talk about the things that they have in common. Whether it's family, or kids, or maybe other issues. And I've heard from so many of these female senators that when it came time for negotiations on legislation where they really did have philosophical differences, it helped them find compromise with one another, because they understood where the senator on the other side of the aisle was coming from as a person, as a human. One more example is there's a weekly prayer breakfast in the US Senate, and that is filled with Democrats and Republicans, and they pray together, but they also get to know each other, and they also get to know each other, and the two go hand in hand. And one example of something that potentially changed as a result of a relationship formed in that prayer breakfast is on the day of the insurrection, on January 6th. James Lankford, who is a Republican senator from Oklahoma, had announced that he was going to vote to challenge the election results. This is before the attack. And during the attack, when senators were in lockdown, brought to an undisclosed location, Chris Coons, who is a Democrat, he actually has Joe Biden's seat. He's a progressive Democrat, but also a regular attendee of the prayer breakfast. He had a long talk with Lankford and really, really pushed him as a human to human, and said, look at what we're seeing. You got to change. You got to vote yes and not challenge these results. And I'm sure there were other factors, and not just Chris Coons, but Lankford changed his mind and he changed his vote. And there's no question in my mind that that was at least part of the reason that he did that. And that was, again, a relationship formed through a common interest, which is their faith, over many, many years. Now, having said all that, I mentioned Alan's brother, Ted. I was just talking to him, and he was walking the halls today and ran into James Lankford today. And Lankford told him that part of the issue that he is having in the era of Trump, and Lankford, I should say, is on the ballot in 2 years. So he's on the ballot next. So he's starting to really gear up for his reelection and potentially to get a primary, since he's in a really red state of Oklahoma. And what he said to Ted was that, you know, part of the issue is that he said there are 4 million people in Oklahoma who don't believe that the election wasn't stolen. So the flip side of that, 4 million people in Oklahoma who voted for Trump, and a lot of them believe what the president has been saying, which is that the election was stolen. And that leads me into, you know, kind of my last point here. And I don't know what the answer is to this. And boy, if I did, I would be able to, you know, stop world hunger and, you know, encourage world peace and everything else that we would love to do, which is that people right now are not coming from the same set of facts. And so it is so hard to bridge a very deep divide when you don't agree on the same set of facts. Now, why don't people agree on the same set of facts? They don't because, again, a lot of the people in Oklahoma who are Lankford's constituents are listening to Fox News, conservative media, the former president, telling them over and over again that the election was stolen. And so you have people like Lankford and other Republicans who are in a very tough spot because they, even if they don't believe that, which most of them don't, they see the facts and that maybe there were, you know, there was the regular amount of fraud, but not enough to change the outcome of the election. Certainly not anyway, in the way that that former President Trump says. But it's very hard to reason with people who believe a lie and don't believe, again, in the same set of facts. And I don't know what the answer to that is, except just from my perch and our collective perch at CNN and other media is just to do our best to report the facts, to repeat the facts, and to call out things that aren't true. And it's not easy these days, but we try. And again, I think the hope is that it is a different world. It is a new world. You do genuinely have a president who certainly has very specific beliefs and very specific ideas and a philosophy on how to govern, but is also a deal maker at heart and wants to resolve conflict as part of his DNA. And I'll end it there. And I would love to take questions from you, Alan, and anybody else.
Dana, thank you so much, and encourage the community. Please put your questions in the chat room or raise a hand. Let me get started, Dana, myself. And first, thank you so much. And on a personal note, we, the Waxmans, are so proud of you and everything you've been doing. And my folks will be leading a conflict prevention and resolution workshop later during the conference. So we can all look forward to that. Dana, I want to pick up with you on, you say we at CNN, and I really want to ask you, you know, over the last 4 years, it's really been a tremendous conflict, tremendous discussion, tremendous debate, productive, unproductive. The media has been increasingly engaged in the debate, in the conflict. How do you see your role? And often, be it when you're on State of the Union and you're moderating a presidential debate, you all in the media become involved as well in some respects. And there are those who view you as a combatant and part of the conflict. How do you view yourself, and what are your own reflections on the role, your role, CNN's role, the media's role, as it's played out over the last several years?
It's changed so much, Alan. I mean, it really, really has. And it's because of what I talked about. It's because of the fact that the truth is more important than ever. And you can't just rely on the old journalistic formula of Republican John Doe says X, Democrat Jane Doe says Y. You decide, American, you know, voter or, you know, Q public. It doesn't work because you can't, you know, there's a term, it's the sort of both sides it. And you can't do it when Jane Doe member of Congress is just not telling the truth. And so we just have to stand up for the truth in a way that we never did. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have been sitting on a set or sitting in front of a camera, or had been, past tense, and we were listening to a presidential press conference or a presidential speech, and President Trump would just go on and on about things that were just not factually accurate. And the first time or a couple of times that I had to come out and say, what you just heard from the president of the United States was not true, I felt like I was going to throw up, because it's such anathema. I mean, it doesn't feel good to say that. It feels horrible, because you don't want to think that an elected official who has so much power and so much responsibility can do that. But it happened over and over, and then it became, unfortunately, more commonplace that it should. And the deeper it got, the more of a responsibility we all felt that we had, and it did change. It changed a lot. And what it taught me is that I will never take our role in democracy for granted, ever. I'm not sure that I didn't necessarily do it before, but I got into journalism because I'm interested in it. I like being a part of the events of our time, and I'd like actually having a bird's eye view at both sides of a philosophical or an ideological or a political debate. But I didn't get into it to stand up for democracy in the Fourth Estate. That just wasn't my thing. But now it is, because we were put in that position.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I know we're getting a lot of questions that are coming in, and so let me run through some of these with you. I guess this is a question you'd expect from a mediation group. Do legislators in DC ever call on the help of professional mediators, to your knowledge?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think so. They certainly have kind of lunches and meetings where they invite outside people in. But the truth is, I think that they all consider themselves expert at mediation. So I don't think it's a common practice, but it's a really good idea.
All right, maybe that's an opportunity. Again, on this issue of truth, there's a question here about alternative facts. I recall the initial reference to that, but the notion, many in our community are actually involved in arbitrating and adjudicating factual issues as they occur, and there may be two different sets of facts that folks are arguing vehemently about. How do you all deal in the media? I mean, sometimes it may be in plain sight, but those difficult questions that sometimes do arise where there may be factual disputes and so forth. What does CNN do? What do you do in trying to deal with kind of different versions of what the situation may be or the factual references may be?
No, that's a very good question. The answer is you say what you know, and you say that. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example where a fact, maybe you can think of an example where a fact would be in dispute, it's not a fact and a lie, or truth and a lie, but a genuine fact is in dispute. Whereas, I mean, I don't know, let's just say, which is probably not something that would come up in my world, but just for example, a witness says, oh, I saw that person go into the building at 6 o'clock. And another witness says, no, I saw that person go into the building at 7 o'clock. Well, we don't know what the answer is, but when you can tell the story and make clear to the viewer, we don't know what the answer is. And there are two different, I don't know, maybe that's not a set of facts, but two different points of view on something. And I think in that case, you really have to telegraph that we don't know which one is right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of things like early on in COVID, when there was such confusion. Do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Even people now who are advocating for masks were thinking, no, you don't wear. and people were putting out different assertions on
Mhm.
what was the right thing to do. And there may be any number of issues around that that are firmly held by folks. How do we, um, how does the media deal with that kind of a situation rather than the light was green or the light was red? Those,
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, for the most part, we're not scientists. Sanjay Gupta is a doctor. We have scientists who work for us, and more do now. So we rely on them and people who are objective and yet very well informed about the science. And and in some ways, you do have to take a, a leap. When the CDC says X, you have to hope that the CDC is saying it because of data that they crunched. I mean, during the Trump years, now we even hear from Deborah Birx. It was really hard because, you had Deborah Birx saying X, and then you had President Trump getting stuff that was just made up from other people who had agendas. And so, in those situations, you just have to, you know, hear what they're saying, say what they're saying about like a mask or about the numbers of something or about vaccines or whatever it is. And then that is an example of where you have to go to an expert witness in the Sanjay Gupta
well done. Well
in,
done.
in the Sanjay Gupta thing.
um, Here's a great question on the subject of conflict prevention and resolution. Does
Mhm.
CNN ever talk to Fox News? Do you all try to find any common ground yourselves on the media side of the aisle as you cover events? What does that look like?
Um, so, I have friends who are reporters for Fox, who are real reporters, who are genuine, objective reporters who cover beats, who are good people and good journalists, who are in really tough positions because of not just their primetime programming, their morning programming, their mandate from above. And so the answer is yes. I mean, I've covered events alongside Fox reporters for my whole career. And so in that kind of arena, yes. When it comes to, Tucker Carlson versus Chris Cuomo, no, absolutely not. No, zero chance. But we do work with them also, in a maybe a more mundane way as part of um, what's called the network pool to cover the White House, for example, and now more and more, especially because of COVID, to cover Congress and other beats, to limit the people who are actually interfacing with other people, just to keep the social distancing and so forth. And so in that pool is CNN, CBS, ABC, um, NBC, and
Sure.
Fox.
Yeah.
So in that respect, the kind of the bosses on that level are talking all the time.
Yeah. Dana, share with us, if you would, January 6th, just your personal reflections, personal experiences on that day, and just, what that was doing for you personally from the standpoint of the media. Just reflect on that a bit with us, if you would.
Wow. Well, I really consider myself lucky that I was in our studio. I wasn't on Capitol Hill. And having said that, I'm lucky from a personal safety point of view, from a reporter's point of view of like wanting to be where the story is. I'm kind of sad that I wasn't there because I have such a love for that building, for the institution of Congress, because I covered it for so long, for the the people who work there, from the Capitol police officers to the cafeteria workers, to the clerks. I mean, it's like a college campus, and you kind of everybody kind of knows, if not names, but you recognize people. And so, look, I mean, to see people the way that they did with such aggression and such vitriol, to storm the Capitol, to scale the outside of the building, and do it in such a way that it was basically your worst nightmare. And I just kept thinking, what if this was ISIS? What if this was, some foreign entity that came in, and and everybody would be beyond shaken. And people are shaken, but maybe not enough, because it was domestic, to be honest with you. And so as I watched the swarm of people, and the guy with the Confederate flag walking through a hallway that I must have walked 100,000 times, and to be texting with members of Congress and asking, where are you? I'm on the floor. I'm hiding in, behind a desk. I'm under a table. And it was absolutely terrifying. And of course, not the least of which, I was worried about your brother-in-law. I was worried about my friends who were up there. Where were they? Were they safe? Could they hear things? Were they taking precaution? I mean, we just didn't know. And now that we know so much more about what these people really intended to do, which in many cases was to actually assassinate members of Congress, it is remarkable. In the radio and television area, which is where I worked, they had the presence of mind to take the plate off the door, so that because I don't know if you've heard, but we are the enemy of the people in a lot of these people's minds. So they took the plate off the door, so it was more anonymous. I heard members of Congress saying that they took off their congressional pins because they didn't want these people to know who they were. It's just, it's scary. And even though, there's lots of controversy about the Capitol Police, questions about whether people were in on it or not. I worked up there, and I've covered Congress long enough to know that for the most part, all of these men and women were doing their best. And if you look back on it, they did the right thing, because they protected the people and they gave up the building. And that's what they needed to do. And could you imagine if they didn't, given what we know now about the goal of a lot of these guys?
No. Contrast that with your reflections on Inauguration Day this year. What was that like for you?
In some ways it was weird, because this is the first time in, I don't know, 5 inaugurations that I haven't physically been at the Capitol. But it wasn't so much because of security, it was because of COVID, because they're just, for social distance reasons, they didn't put the press platforms out the way that they did in sort of, they usually build these big platforms right on the west front of the Capitol, so we could physically be right there and see the inauguration. Or on the flip side, for many inaugurations, I was inside the rotunda on the second floor, so that when people came in from the inauguration, they walked right by us, so we got to see them. So I wasn't at the Capitol. I was at a different location. We were on a set overlooking the White House, which was also very cool, particularly at night, because we got such an amazing view of those fireworks. It was like the fireworks they were for us. It was unbelievable. I've seen so many fireworks in Washington since I went to college here, and nothing compares to that. It was really cool. But it was not, it was not a given that, given the pandemic, again, never mind the security risks, that this inauguration was going to look like inaugurations past. It was not a given at all. The Biden transition fought for it. People like Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, and Roy Blunt, senator from Missouri, who were heads of the Rules Committee, which made them in charge of the inaugural committee. They fought really hard to make it look and feel as normal as possible. And that was important. Again, never mind COVID, but because of the challenge that President Trump was putting on it. And they planned that before the insurrection. So it was very, very nice to see it. And it was just beautiful. it was absolutely beautiful. From Lady Gaga, who can do no wrong in my book, who was like, no one can ever sing that the national anthem ever again after that, to the amazing Amanda Gorman, who just signed with a modeling agency today, which is just going to be one of her many jobs and talents in her very bright future. You know, it was very nice. It was very nice.
Very redeeming. A lot in our community here are posing questions about what we can do. And let me say, there's suggestions about, can we do things to help foster relationships better? Can we ask our representatives to do better? Can we form groups that really focus on problem solving? Or is what we're really looking at more fundamental change, the formation of a new centrist party, changing the Republican Party, changing the Democratic Party, moving out the extremes? What are your thoughts? Is this something that is just a question of, you mentioned at the outset, it was very interesting, you talked about root causes and relationships, which I think is so profound. We always talk about that need for relationships. How do we, is it just about getting those relationships, I shouldn't say just about, getting the relationships back together, or do we need something more fundamentally different in our political system to bring this change about?
I don't think a fundamental change in the political system is going to happen. I mean, I just think that when it comes to forming a new party, in that sense, I just, it's so hard to do that, and it hasn't happened in so long. I don't think that's that realistic in the short term. What I do think is realistic, and I say this all the time, is on a very, very local level, on a neighborhood level, on a, on your street level, is to talk to your neighbors and to try to have civil conversations about politics and policy, and to have an understanding, like I was talking about, on an elected official level, on a local level. And I think, that is, I'm sure you all are experiencing this. Families are not speaking to one another because it's so hot right now when it comes to the political divide, and neighbors are not speaking to one another. So I really think that it does help to start on a local level and to reach out and to have an understanding. And I know that probably sounds really corny and naive, but I actually really believe it. The other thing that I go back to, and I don't know the answer to this, is how we deal with misinformation and the echo chamber, social media, and only consuming the information that feeds your preconceived notions of what things should be like, as opposed to listening to another side. And I think the two things that I just said are related.
And this brings a question that's a follow-up to something I was asking you before about the media's role. The media sometimes amplifies the echo chamber, covers. There are those who look at CNN or other organizations. You really gave the bullhorn over the last 4 years to that echo chamber. Further reflections on that, or is this the new normal breaking news, like the coverage has to be what it has to be? What are your reflections on that?
Well, I think even my my boss, Jeff Zucker, has said publicly a number of times that that it was a mistake early on, like 2015 and then early 2016, to give then just candidate Trump all of the coverage that he got, the live rallies, because it was entertaining. And that stopped. That did not happen. Frankly, for both candidates, but it really didn't happen at all for Trump. I mean, we took almost no live campaign events that Donald Trump had in 2020, almost none. And that was a lesson learned from 2016. And that's not to say we didn't cover things that he said, we didn't cover things that he did, but the unfiltered stopped, which I thought was really important. And yeah, of course, I mean, we we cover the news, we cover what's in front of us. You know, we try to get deeper and away from the sort of tit for tat when we can, but it's not easy. I mean, I'm going to be completely honest, it's not easy. You know, if there is a silver lining, and it sounds like a silly way to say it, I'll probably have to come up with a different way to say it, but you know, something like COVID, you know, yes, it became partisan, which was just kind of silly, but beyond that, just the fundamental news coverage of this event and what it was doing, what it is doing, not was, it is in a big way doing to people, to their lives. So I feel like because of COVID, we have had to, rightly so, get back to the human element of things around us. And then because that was going on in, you know, in a big way during the campaign, that definitely took some of the oxygen out of the political back and forth. But of course it existed.
Yeah. Well, Dana, this has been great. You know, it's really wonderful of you to share insights that only you have. So much you're talking about in terms of relations, in terms of finding compassion, in terms of finding common ground is, of course, part and parcel of what we do. And it's interesting to see it from a different perspective. I heard Brian Stevenson talk about the need for us to get out of our bubbles.
Exactly.
And to really go explore different bubbles. And I'm committed to mediating the conversation between you and Tucker Carlson. So I'm holding that out as still an objective here. But no, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're always welcome back. We'd love to have you. And
Thank
I know our whole community joins me in thanking you for really a tremendous evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
So delighted you're back with us this afternoon for a special conversation with a person who I believe really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give an abbreviated one that will not do him full justice. We're delighted to be joined by General Jim Mattis, who most recently, I think as you all know, served as Secretary of Defense under the prior president in 2017-18. Prior to that cabinet role, General Mattis served 43 years in the Marine Corps. His time there culminated with 3 years as commander of U.S. Central Command, where he oversaw joint efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq and helped shape U.S. policy toward Iran. It is hard to show on Zoom, but I know all of you join me in our debt of gratitude to the General for his service over so many years to our country. General Mattis is currently a senior counselor at the Cone Group, a consulting firm that has a strategic alliance with our member, DLA Piper. The Cone Group provides corporate leadership with strategic advice in business development, regulatory affairs, deal sourcing, and capital raising activities. In addition, General Mattis currently holds the title of the Davies Family Distinguished Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, where he lectures on domestic and international security policy. General Mattis, welcome to CPR.
Well, thanks very much, Alan, and thanks all of you for having me here today. It's an honor to be with the International Institute in an age when I think we need a whole lot more conflict prevention and resolution in this world. When I was first asked to do this by Lauren Brown at DLA Piper, I was a little perplexed since I've somewhat been on the other side of the issue as far as preventing conflicts, at least in some people's minds. But I had enough confidence in Lauren and the DLA Piper crew, where I always get great education myself when I engage with them to look at it. And I would just tell you that conflict resolution, while it's not an area I saw myself in the terms I think many of you look at it, I would just say that your alternative dispute resolutions, I just feel a chord resonate when I look at those. I mean, I've written enough next to kin letters not to want to ever see another war on this planet. And I think we need here at home today, even, and certainly abroad, we need more of your kind of thinking. There is a clear role for leadership. It's heartening to me that there are people like you who actually are engaged in this effort across societies, inside our own society, but certainly elsewhere. And I hope that some of my experiences might be relevant to you, since the trials that I go through in my line of work when we are unable to prevent a conflict are things called war. And there's probably no more single tragic human endeavor on this planet than that. So let's go back over to you, Alan, and see where you want to take it.
Well, thank you, General, and really delighted to have your insights for our community. Let's dive right in. And based on events of recent weeks, I feel compelled to start with a question I know has no clear answer. What are your thoughts on how our country can begin to move forward toward reconciliation after everything that has occurred leading up to and following the election? Sometimes seems that half the country hates the other half and vice versa. How can we find some sense of common ground and shared values as Americans once again?
Boy, that is the question for our age, and certainly it's a question all of us adults owe a mature answer to if we're going to turn this country over to the next generation in a way that it lives up to its promise of always getting better. As a World War II Marine taught us in my younger days in the Marines, a country doesn't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for, but it's always got to be striving to be better, more fair, picking up those on the margins. And I was reading something recently by Madeleine Albright that really struck home to me, because I believe in the first principles of this country. I'm an unapologetic believer in them. And she said that when you read the words, we the people, there's no us and them in it. And yet today we seem to be divided, Alan, as you pointed out, by us and them. And I think that we've got to get back to a fundamental friendliness, a fundamental respect for each other, a little more humility where we say, you know, I just might be wrong on this issue. Maybe someone else is worth listening to. And listening to them with the willingness to be persuaded, recognizing even a broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe there's something this other person I disagree with can offer me to understand the world a little better. I think too, though, in a more pragmatic sense right now, we'd better get back to areas we can agree on, taking care of our schools, fixing the potholes, and just leave some of the scorching rhetoric and the issues that draw scorching rhetoric alone for a little while. Let them cool a little bit. I've been studying how Mandela worked it after the fall of apartheid in South Africa, how Mannerheim worked it twice in his lifetime in Finland to try to put that society back together after horrible times where they were literally fighting each other in the streets, in the forests, and this sort of thing. And it does take leadership. It takes a certain amount of humility, and it takes certainly a return to what Tom Ricks in his latest book calls First Principles, a book I'd recommend to everyone because it really talks about where did our founding fathers find the ideas that made us such a revolutionary country. And we remain that today. Ask any authoritarian what they're most fearful of, and it's what we stand for. So I think back to first principles, a little humility, listen to one another, and let's start fixing things we can agree on and work our way back to the more divisive issues and see what we can do to address those as well.
Very good counsel indeed. I was reading an interview you recently gave to David Ignatius of the Washington Post. Mm-hmm. And apropos of this subject of getting back to first principles, one of the things you mentioned in that interview is to make sure we act in a way like we're worth it. And I'm wondering if you might expound upon that. We're an organization that believes in less conflict and more purpose, and the purpose part of it, and reminding ourselves that we're worth it. it seems to me could be very important. And I'm wondering if you might explain a little bit further what you were meaning by that.
The first point I would make is you may only be young once, but you can be immature forever. It's time the adults start acting like adults and use study and serious thinking, some humility. And I realize the education system has probably let us down a little bit in the area of civics education, but there's no excuse for people in a free society, in a country of the people, by the people, for the people, to abrogate their responsibility to get serious and set examples of scholarship and all. I would also, I was talking to a young guy. I mean, I was in the Marine Infantry, and it's full of young people. It's named infantry for a reason, infant soldier. And he's a very, very famous young man now. He's the youngest living Medal of Honor winner. I met him in the hospital long before he got it. And he was in a taxi cab, and the driver, whose family was an immigrant family from Pakistan, kept interrupting him as he's trying to write his speech. He's not used to giving speeches. He's going off to give a speech, kept interrupting with questions and talking with him and listening to him on the phone, talking to the event organizer. And he was explaining too how his sister was now going to college and she couldn't do that where he came from. And finally, the young corporal put his papers down, listened to him for a while. And the guy said, "By the way, you were in the military. I picked up from your phone call. Thanks for your service." And he said, without even thinking, just, "You're worth it." And notice he didn't ask, "Who did you vote for in the last election?" He didn't care if it was a male or female. It was a male talking about his sister having opportunity. He didn't care about the race. He didn't know where the guy went for his religious, spiritual faith, if he went to mosque or synagogue or church or saloon. He just said, "You're worth it." I think what we have to do is we all have to adopt that young Marine's perspective, that in this country, your fellow citizens are worth looking out for. They're worth respecting. They're worth obeying the rule of law, frankly. If you don't like something, yes, you can protest, but you don't use violence. You don't use destruction. I think we have to act like we're worth it. And that's especially burdensome right now, I think, on those of us who are adults who, in too many cases, are still acting like immature children who don't have any need to grow up, that our actions have no consequences. So I would start with the role model that we all need to be our own best selves in a country that relies on people to be part of the solution. We can't cross it off and give it to a king or a dictator or something like that. It's us.
That is profoundly important, and I think gets to the issue of leadership, which you've held a variety of positions on. You talk in your book, which I commend to our community, Call Sign Chaos, about executive leadership, direct leadership, strategic leadership. What are the roles of leaders in reminding us of getting back to that sense of worth? And more broadly, in your experience, what have you found to be critical aspects of leadership you've seen leaders do well and where you've seen leaders fail?
Boy, what a question, Alan. But, if we look back to the founding of the country, you have to wonder, how did George Washington put together a revolutionary army of free men who said, wait a minute, I don't take orders. I'm a free person. And yet he was able to turn out an army of disciplined, basically volunteers, amateurs, and they imparted to them a need for discipline in their ranks, or they were going to not only lose on the battlefield, they'd probably end up dead. And yet somehow, with French help, he was able to humble the Redcoats, the best army in the world that was going to defeat Napoleon a few years later. So how did he do it? And it's very boring, actually, to watch how he did it. He would listen, and he would listen with a willingness to be persuaded. He would actually change his views as he listened to these guys from Delaware who went out on the water every day, and they captained their own boat, and now they're in the Army. And the guys from South Carolina who couldn't even understand those funny talking people from Boston. And somehow he puts this whole thing together, and he's learning from them. as he's listening to him. He's willing to be persuaded. He listens. He learns. This is showing respect. And then he does this. He helps them. He helps them with the most simple things at times, like getting socks and warm coats and blankets. He does anything he can to help. And only then does he lead. And I learned this over many years, but I was a second lieutenant in Okinawa, brand new infantry officer, 21 years old, 40 sailors and Marines. And I had to go down and I had to be at the gate basically of a US military base because that week the demonstrations were going. So I go down there and we get the Marines lined up and they have bayonets on their rifles. We're drawn up across the street. Obviously a conflict resolution situation that we could use all of your help on. And here comes the Red Armband Communist Party of Okinawa down the street demonstrating about Yankee go home. We don't want you on these bases. And so my sergeant takes the young lieutenant by the hand and said, let's go meet the leader. I said, what do you mean? I mean, we stand here behind the bayonet. He said, no, let's go talk to the leader. So he walked up to the guy who was obviously in charge, had a megaphone and was screaming a lot of things that I couldn't understand and spoke English. That was my first surprise. And so we basically said, okay, the Marines will stand here and we'll back up to this point. You guys can come and yell. You can only spit on the ground and you can shout and you can wave your fist, but you must not touch any of the Marines' rifles. He tried and said, okay, but I want you to fall back quickly to that line. So initially I can say, see, we've made our point. So we worked all this out. And here was the well-disciplined communist rioters and the well-disciplined Marines basically showing how this anti-American demonstration was going to go. So it was really quite an introduction to how do you resolve things. And basically everybody got satisfied there that day. And we went home feeling quite good that no one penetrated the base. They felt quite good that the Marines stepped back from them a little ways and everybody's happy. And not everything turns out that way. I can assure you, it doesn't always go that way. But as you go up to what you called strategic leadership, you know, we have a lot of partisanship in Washington right now. We're all aware of it. But I was of the view that national security is a nonpartisan issue. Republican conservative Senator Vandenberg from Michigan was asked once, why would he work with this terrible socialist, President Truman, on national security? He said, politics ends at the water's edge. So that was my view going into the job. So when we put together the national defense strategy, I went to Republicans and Democrats on the Hill and took their input. I didn't care what party they were in, if they were interested in helping me write it. I went to our NATO allies. I went to Japan, Australia. It took me a year, but when I was done, I had a strategy put together. And on our last budget, record-breaking, to support that strategy, I got 87% of the House and the Senate Democrats and Republicans to vote for it. So there's also a listening and learning from your sergeant, from your adversary, and certainly when you're trying to make a nonpartisan win-win where everybody comes out feeling like they've been addressed. Can't agree with everybody, but at least you can show them respect. And it works out really quite well. And it's just George Washington's age-old listen, learn, help, lead. That has worked very well for me. I get all my new ideas, by the way, Alan, from old books. So forgive me if I'm boring any of you with some of these old ideas here.
Not at all. Listen, learn, help, and lead. That is profoundly important. I'm wondering, you almost uniquely sit in the position of having been a civilian leader of the military as Secretary of Defense. You've also been a military leader, and often, I know in your book, you talk about as a military leader having to listen to civilians and who give direction, who may not even appreciate the difficulties of battle, the risks that are involved. And at times you were asked to take on missions that you may have disagreed with from civilian leadership to pursue that forward. I think a significant example of that may have been in Iraq. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like to prepare for a fight that you think might be ill-advised?
Yeah, that really goes to the heart of our system of government, Alan, and loyalty counts most when there's 100 reasons to not be loyal. It's easy to be loyal when everything's going well, you agree with everything. But on 9/11, right after 9/11, and we in the intelligence services and the military, we knew we'd let the country down. Thousands dead, citizens, innocent citizens from 91 countries died on 9/11, by the way. We'd let down more than just our own country. And we dealt with these guys for years in the shadows, and we were out to do them damage. We went off. I was in Afghanistan shortly thereafter with a naval task force operating in southern Afghanistan, Marines and sailors, SEALs, and about a dozen allied countries were already on the ground supporting us because we'd been attacked, something to remember. And I got called back after we'd only been fighting for about 6 months. We were really doing well, was going very well. And I got back to California and I walked in, I was a 1-star, and I walked into my 3-star commander's office. I said, why'd you call me back? We were doing good out there. And he said, well, we want you to get 1st Marine Division ready to go, 23,000 sailors, Marines, getting ready to go to Iraq. I said, really? Why? And he said, well, some people in Washington think they had something to do with 9/11. I started laughing. And I'd spent, unfortunately, too many of my years since 1979 in the Middle East. If Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden were in the same room, they'd have killed each other. And when I brought that up, the general just said, Jim, go down and get the division ready to go. If we're given the order, you got to have them ready. So I went down, we got ready to go. Several senior generals did not agree with the argument. Their careers were ended. They were retired. You serve at the pleasure of the president. That's the way it goes. So we went in and we tried to do it as best we could. And I can just tell you, from the invasion to what happened afterwards, we gave it our best shot. But it really comes down, how do you do it? How do you organize your thinking? One is to keep faith in the system, that we could have been wrong too. It could have been that it was the right thing to do strategically. Morally, I cannot make an argument to defend Saddam Hussein still being in power. But in the military, we take a pretty grim look at these things. We look at strategy, and our view was if we could contain Saddam, he could contain Iran, and that was the imperfect peace we were trying to keep in the Middle East. Once you go to war, it's fundamentally unpredictable, and I think we've all experienced that. But if you can't keep faith in the system, if you don't think that eventually civilian control is the right thing, then maybe you fight it more. And you can, if it becomes a moral issue, a principle issue, you can resign. But an officer can only resign once, and the lance corporals, they're going to cross the line of departure anyway. So you got to be careful that when you resign, it's you're willing to take that stand, but you also, as a general, are usually pretty reluctant to leave the field to your young men who are going to have to face the decision without you.
What's that like on a personal level, if I could ask, General? Going to battle, doing the calculus in your head of the risks, the putting men and women in harm's way, the deaths that will ensue, in particular when you yourself may not think it's the right course of action. What is that like on a personal level, leading folks into battle with those consequences?
Well, fortunately, because we're imbued with the civilian control of the military, and it's more driven home in military training, in military schools than it ever was in my undergraduate years or in high school. I mean, this is something we're proud of. I mean, we promote it when we're dealing with foreign militaries overseas. So you rather make your peace about it then. Remember too, that, and it became especially obvious when I'd be in White House meetings as a 4-star, as a NATO Supreme Commander, or as the CENTCOM commander, as you mentioned there. civilians are generally elected based on positive things, better health care, lower taxes, better education, these kind of things. And then they come into office and you basically, those human aspirations come face to face with a guy in a uniform or an intel officer who says, by the way, something real bad is going on and we're trying to stop it, but you need to know about it. And pretty soon you're in meetings that if I used to read books actually to prepare this, not for the details of what the meeting was about, but for the demands on your patients, because you're there to basically reconcile these polarities. Here you have civilians promoted into their job by the people, for the people, and a government of the people. They have certain aspirations, they have timelines. The military urgently works to resolve certain things. The idea being, if we don't, tomorrow is going to be worse. And you have to try to reconcile those polarities, understanding they may want to delay the decision because new opportunities may arise, a legitimate reason. But in your mind, you know the kind of people you're up against. I used to keep pictures of the opposing generals in my desk, so I could just look at them at time to time and remind myself they're trying to undo everything that I'm trying to do. And if you can maintain that respect for the different points of view, you're best positioned to use historic examples to show why your position is worth consideration. It was a problem, frankly, with males my age who had not served in the military more than any other group. Not as much a problem with younger males or with any females, because at my age, people knew that you either went into the military or you were not qualified or you dodged the draft. And that was an elephant in the room, to tell you the truth. You talk about on a personal basis, that was something that you could never address, but you knew was there. That's why using history allowed you to depersonalize the issue, and it didn't become a manhood issue there. With females in national security, generally not a problem. It was not a problem, or with younger people who had never faced the draft and being required to serve. So you just kind of deal with it as you would anyone else. If you have a little bit of humility in you, that maybe they have some good ideas, although frankly, at times you kind of wondered if they'd ever read a history book. That's why I read Marcus Aurelius before I went into the room with him, to keep myself calm as I listen to certain things. But you're human too, so you have to be once in a while you'd walk out and want to go for a 3-mile run just to burn off a little frustration.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, that brings us to some issues of conflict resolution in dealing with divergent opinions that you may confront and so forth. You're often in a position of having to make immensely important decisions. You're collecting feedback, often divergent feedback from any number of stakeholders. Do you have a personal approach, a personal philosophy to how you make those decisions when so much is at stake? Do you have your own kind of methodology for doing that?
Yeah. One point I would make is you have to define the problem to everyone's satisfaction, because if you don't start there, you will never come up with agreement on the solution, because you may be arguing about the solution, but in fact, what you're really arguing about is you're not in agreement on what problem you're trying to solve. Einstein said if he had 1 hour to save the world, I think it's attributed to him anyway, how would he compose his thoughts? He said, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the world and I'd save the world in 5 minutes. The idea in Washington, D.C., I think too often we don't come to agreement on what is the real fundamental problem to what I would call a Jesuit's level of satisfaction, and then work from there. First thing you do once you decide on that problem, and you've probably had to use this in order to come up with the problem definition, quantify it to the degree you can. Now, you may only be able to, the higher you go in strategy, you may be able to quantify less and less. It becomes more art than science. but you must quantify the problem, or you're just being mentally lazy, intellectually lazy. If you quantify too far, you become mechanistic. So knowing when you introduce non-quantifiable subjective things is very, very important. So start with quantification and make sure you've at least got some data in there. We've had a lot of data-free decisions, I'm afraid, in Washington at times, even on things that beg for data. Another point is the, there's an old song, it's so old now, you have to listen to it on NPR. But when it was in rock and roll when I was going through college, and it's by a group called Crosby, Stills and Nash. And one of the sentences in it, I didn't understand at the time, I do now, said, you, when you're on the road, must have a code that you can live by. And what I found was in matters of military operations, of peace and war, the lawyer's view of the world, pardon me, everybody, did not comport with the real world that I had to confront. The paper world that they constructed broke down at the very point of the passions being introduced. So you have to have a code and say, it's not just what's legal, because that's a pretty broad swath of things on the international plane. It's also what's moral, and that will generally narrow the playing field significantly. And then if you run the ethical midfield so that if you make a mistake, you're not out of bounds, you can generally represent America's better angels, as Lincoln put it, and not find yourself arguing to defend an indefensible position. But that said, it's an atavistic, primitive, ugly world that you enter into when you enter the battlefield. And somehow you've got to remember that every battlefield is at the same time a humanitarian field. And what you're trying to do is come up with a better peace. So what guided me as I got to the highest ranks, and certainly when I was Secretary of Defense, sitting down with a guy I still call St. Rex of Texas, Rex Tillerson, before either one of us were confirmed by the Senate, my point was that we have militarized our foreign policy for the last 25 years. That's not a partisan statement, that's Republican and Democrat, that we needed to get State Department diplomats back into the driver's seat of foreign policy, that I would come in, I'd tell them what the military could do, what it couldn't do, what the military factors were. But I said, let's you and I meet every week. And every time before we walk into the White House, we come up with a State and a Defense Department position. So the White House isn't playing referee between these two behemoths of the American executive branch. And we come in there together, informed by the data that the intel services give us. And we do our best to, what I call, keep the peace. One more year, one more month, one more week, one more day, one more hour, while our diplomats work their magic. So that's kind of the framework I used going into those kind of situations, and what I learned along the way from some great, great teachers.
That's great. Why is that you think that foreign policy has become so militarized? Why have we leaned in that direction rather than finding more diplomatic solutions or leading in that way?
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question. You know, I teach now. Before COVID, I do it in person. I primarily, of course, at Stanford, but also 30 days in residence at Dartmouth, 3 days at USC, 10 days at Berkeley, Harvard, just going around Colorado State, Washington State. And I sit in on different classes. I go to the bookstores and look at the subjects of the books, the titles. And I wonder if today we really teach diplomatic and military history in an applied way. I know at Harvard, they're trying to do that right now with Graham Allison and others. But by and large, we don't understand that history. And it almost seems to me, I also, believe it or not, I lecture at medical schools. It's almost like you'd walk into a medical school and a doctor would say, by the way, let's not discuss cancer. It's really bad stuff. And we just don't want to be involved in something as ugly as cancer here in our medical school. I mean, you look at him like he's crazy. Well, I don't know that educationally we are any longer turning out people who can think strategically. And by the way, this isn't just a problem here in America, it's across the Western democracies. I find the same problem. And if you can't think strategically and set those priorities, if you're not historically informed, then you're almost like trying to plant your ideas as if they're cut flowers bought from the florist, and you stick them in the ground, you wonder why they're dead a week later. Well, they have no roots. I mean, how do you do it? I'll be frank, but I don't have an original thought in my head. I have shanghaied ideas from the ancients to my current enemies. That I get my ideas elsewhere. And we have a pretty narrowly educated population. I think too, we went into a unipolar moment when for a little while after the wall came down, it was 1991. We had Desert Shield, Desert Storm, a very fast and victorious fight to liberate Kuwait. And I think there came a point where we forgot traditional diplomatic tools. It became only two things. Either we use economic sanctions and weaponize the dollar, or we use regime change. Well, that's not the way America makes it. We have two fundamental sources of power in this country. And one is the power of intimidation. And I was part of that. You mess with us and free men and women will fight like the Dickens. And dictators sometimes have wondered about it. Kaiser Wilhelm, Hitler, Tojo, Stalin, they wonder about it, but the fact is we've proven it. But the bigger power, the stronger power, for all my love of my sailors and Marines and everything else associated with, is the power of inspiration, the American way of life, democracy, the rule of law, the sense of the dignity of the individual. And I can give a story about that a little later on if you have time on, but let me stop there so we get to some more questions.
No, that's great. And please, love your stories and your recounting of history. I know you're such a student of history. I've read where you've read over 7,000 books. Say a little bit more, if you would, on what you think is lacking sort of from educating folks today in terms of appreciating that history, and maybe that'll lead us into your story.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I've always enjoyed reading. I like studying geology. I'm from the American West, so I read a lot about the Native Americans and the immigrants coming out and all. But when I got into the Marines, I found that they actually thought they could train me, and they trained me very well for how to shoot a gun, how to do first aid, how to read a map, how to call for air support. The training's very good, but they actually break training and education far apart. And every about 4 years as an officer, you go off for 1 year of education, continuing education. But also every time you get promoted, for example, all Marines who join, all privates and second lieutenants, there's 6 books they have to read. When they get promoted to corporal or to captain, there's a different reading list for each rank. You make general, and boy, you're so proud of yourself, and immediately in comes a list of 25 books, some of them with by Henry Kissinger with sentences 34 words long. I mean, you never get out of it. And the philosophy was, we'll train you for what we know you're going to face. We're going to educate you for what we cannot anticipate. I tell you, whoever came up with that philosophy in the Chinese sense of when you drink from the well, you owe some thanks to the guy who dug it. Whoever did it, I never aspired to be the Secretary of Defense. At one point, my company commander, a captain, doubted I'd ever make captain, considering some of my antics. But eventually, the reading allowed me to light up a pretty dim lit path ahead and see options, always create options. We're not victims. We can't take refuge in cynicism. There's always an example in history where some human being faced a similar situation, and it doesn't give you a cookie cutter, but what it does, it gives you, in many cases, the questions to ask as you go into it. the considerations to take into consideration as far as the outcome, not just the process. It also teaches you something that you'd better look at processes, because if you have bad processes in human endeavors and good people, the bad processes are going to win 9 out of 10 times. So you've got to work on things that unleash people's initiative if you sense you can trust your people and that they're as capable of their jobs as you were when you had their jobs when you were younger. So that's kind of how I would look at the use of reading, of history. I remember though in the Admiral, I was a 1-star after 9/11, and my 3-star fleet commander, Navy Admiral, Vice Admiral, called me in and he said, look, he said, the CIA and the Green Berets have got the enemy on the back foot up at Mazar-e Sharif, and they're falling back on Kabul. He'd read his history, the Admiral had, and he said, no one's held Kabul in 500 years. They're going to fall back on Kandahar. Can you get the Marines from the Mediterranean and Pacific fleets together, land in southern Afghanistan, and move against Kandahar? I said, yep, I can do it. He said, okay, here's an airplane, go look at it and write the order so I know what to tell Washington. I said, okay. So I'm riding the airplane that night over Kandahar, over Afghanistan for 8 hours. And I can see the fighting here and everything else. And now I'm going to tell you how to make 4-star general. Fight enemy generals dumber than a bucket of rocks, okay? Because I could see Kandahar and I could see this big area they'd left uncovered. And I didn't care how smart they were. I didn't care how many guns they had or tanks. I knew how I was going to stick a knife in their back. And my only concern was how can I do it and lose the fewest of my guys and the fewest innocent civilians in the areas we're going to be fighting. That was because of my reading that I could see in my mind's eye exactly where they'd messed up. And now there was going to be hell to pay. So it really pays off, and it paid off for me so many times. I could give you, 100 more stories about it, but that's just one example of the confidence it brings out as you see a solution, in my case, to we had to resolve a conflict with a group called Al-Qaeda, and we were going to do it the old-fashioned way, like cavemen.
Well, thank goodness you're on our side. That is tremendous. You mentioned before that America, through intimidation and inspiration, wields its tremendous power. Where do relationships come into play there? The alliances. I'm wondering if you might comment on the importance of relationships to our ability to exercise power in the world.
Yeah, Bob Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, I was a 4-star, and he said the only thing that allows governments to work at the top level is trusted personal relations between the people on the team, the cabinet, for example, that sort of thing, which has guided me. But it also rang a bell. I'd been the executive secretary for 2 secretaries of defense, just completely a fluke. I was a Marine colonel and I'd been selected for the job, and I grudgingly went to Washington, D.C. But I remember sitting behind Secretary Perry, Bill Perry, Secretary Bill Cohen, and I watched them as they built trust with their counterpart ministers of defense across NATO, across the Pacific. I knew it well because when each of them left their office, I had to write the thank you letters that cited individual things. I was just amazed at how much effort they had put into creating trust, listening to their counterparts, learning from them, helping them. It comes through again, and leading them. And I think that that trust is the coin of the realm. And with it, you can do a lot. And without it, it's brittle and you probably can't do hardly anything. In this age we're in today, I think it's very important of great power competition that we remember we're not out for great power competition. We're trying to get to great power peace, to prosperity and freedom in the world. We're not trying to get to a war. So we can't let the opportunities for cooperation, collaboration, for example, with China on COVID, as badly as they've handled it, I'll admit it, they're still handling it badly with some of their hocus pocus stories the government's putting on the internet about vaccinations. But we have to look to solve something like COVID or climate change or nuclear proliferation. And we can't let the competition side of our relationship submerge all the opportunities we have, because where we start making progress on some of those global challenges, that's how we push off the chance of conflict. That's actually part of getting to great power peace. And I think that the three words that looking back over my 40 some years in the naval service, the three words about how to deal with problems in the world are allies, allies, and allies. And if you don't, I mean, history is very clear, by the way. History says nations with allies thrive, nations without allies die. It's one of the few things that's almost unchallenged in the history books. You can make it for a short time on your own. Nobody makes it for very long. In the Marines, we say, if you go into a gunfight, bring all your friends with guns. Well, if you're going to a diplomatic fight, bring all your friends with diplomats. I mean, the theme is a good one. But I remember Condoleezza Rice, she was the Secretary of State, and all new generals and admirals go through kind of a 6-week, come out of your service, come to Washington, and you're exposed to a much broader array of the national security establishment. And I remember Secretary Rice, I didn't realize she had a 27-inch finger as she wagged it at us. And she said, and you young generals and admirals, remember this, we do things with our allies, not to our allies. Here was one of the most stable and erudite and practiced international leaders that we have. And she had the lesson down cold. I mean, how are we going to deal with North Korea's nuclear weapons? Hopefully with economic and diplomatic means, with a whole lot of nations in the world aligned to try to defang this problem. How are we going to deal with muscular China's, what they're doing to the human rights of Uyghurs and to dissidents in Hong Kong and all? That's with allies. You cannot show me anything where our policies don't benefit from having allies. So those are some of the framing principles you're brought up with, and in the naval service especially, where you're always pulling into foreign ports or you land your Marines or SEALs in foreign countries. You learn, when in Rome, get along with the Romans. So we can't let the idea that we're only going to deal with perfect allies reduce the number we work with. You can see how in World War II, incompatible systems, the United Kingdom had a monarchy, the United States had a democracy, Joe Stalin had a communist dictatorship. So incompatible systems, but we work for compatible objectives. There are ways in conflict resolution to find common ground, and you do your best then with the American model to inspire them not to do that anymore. You don't just say, I'm not going to deal with them, then wonder why they continue to go off in nefarious ways. You hug them closer when they have a problem, and you work with them. That eats at some people, but I've never seen it help when we cut people off in terms of them becoming more ethical in their performance. So you just keep working with your allies and keep trying to buy one more generation of freedom for this great big experiment you and I call America. And that power of inspiration will work, but the power of intimidation can buy time, but not much more.
Yeah. And the importance of relationships. I'm wondering, last week we had a chance to chat, and one of the observations you made was the way in which we've come to rely upon more legalistic documents to frame our connections with other countries and so forth, and what that has done, sometimes not always most productively, to those relationships. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of your observations in that regard with an audience of lawyers, as it were.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One is, if there's a military coup under our law, we can't deal with the coup, the leaders after that. I mean, it becomes very brittle and a lot of things get cut off. So in Egypt, where everything was going wrong with the Muslim Brotherhood's leadership of the country after the fall of Mubarak, 20 some million, the largest demonstration I think in world history, were in this 20 some million Egyptians were in the streets, and the army stepped in, cheered by the people, ushered the government out, and basically put together what we would call a military interim government. They had civilians in it. I met with them. But at the same time, once you decide that a definition is strictly met, this is where the legal aspects of what we're doing sometimes leave out any nuance at that point. What were we to do? Watch it to turn into what was happening next door in Libya or up in Syria? Remember, Egypt has 1/3 of all of Arab people living there, and it's the center of learning, it's the center of science, center of literature of the Arab world. Do you really want that to look like Libya or Syria today? And we had our hands tied. Another example, an Indonesian special forces unit 24 years ago, 26 years ago now, had done some horrid things during a breakaway time with one of their islands. And we were still under a restriction from working with them, although they had taken out all the leadership. And I explained that under those conditions, the 82nd Airborne Division, or the 1st Marine Division, that had done something wrong. Granted, we put the people in jail when it goes wrong. And, I reminded them, even Jesus of Nazareth had 1 out of 12 go to crap on him. So don't get all upset that we have human beings that disappoint us at times. If I said under your rules, I couldn't train the 82nd Airborne Division or the 1st Marine Division. So you have to get away from a purely legalistic way of looking at things. And by the way, there's opportunities there. There are great opportunities there. For example, Sweden and Finland have never been part of NATO. And yet today they've reinstituted conscription. Sweden's raised its military budget by 40%. They live next door to Russia and they see what Russia is doing. So even though I don't have the legal authorities I have under what the NATO alliance, I was able to get certain authorities with a lot of work in order to find common ground with 2 democracies that were serious about taking their own side, which happened to be our side in defense. So we can't allow legalisms to wipe out common sense, and we can't allow them to destroy the opportunity to act in America's best interest, short and long term. I'm not saying we shouldn't have legalisms. We need the rule of law, but that rule of law must also allow for change and unknown circumstances. And just be careful about trying to find some mechanical legal definition that now restricts us from doing what is in our best interest and a lot of other people's best interest. Enough of my pontificating on that.
No, that's I think very important for us all to keep in mind. General, we're running low on time, and I did have one final question I want to ask, and we'll see if we have any time for others. But you now have, working with the Cone Group, been exposed to the business world. I'm wondering if you have observations on what you have seen as differences, either for good or not so good, in how the private sector manages issues of conflict within our world as compared to those issues you've managed in the global geopolitical world. Early observations from your work in this regard?
Yeah, it's interesting because many of my lectures, discussions are at graduate schools of business. I talk to a fair number of corporate groups every year, and I have since 2013, except for the 2 years as Secretary of Defense. And in general, having engaged a lot with our federal level elected representatives, senators, the federal government, looking at organized religion. I've taught at Christian schools, been to LDS dominated campuses where most of the people are LDS. Catholic schools. I've been to a lot of places around our country, and I find no group that's more capable of defining problems and organizing teams to solve problems than in the business community. But what's been most interesting is the way from the Business Roundtable and others, the way they are widening what they're willing to take in as input in terms of what about the communities where they have factories? What about the employees who are at the low end of the wage scale? It just seems to me that the business community brings a more practiced effort to try to solve problems, define the problems, organize, and actually solve them than any other group. I would encourage the business community to spend more time on governance. Once you got your second house in the Hamptons, okay, you got your kids' education paid for, time to go in and serve on the school board, serve locally on the city council, run for office if that's your bent, but spend time giving back in the governance area, local, state, federal, because we need what business is bringing right now. I do not find any more ethically governed group in general and more accepting of legalities than I do there. And I just don't see that kind of leadership in academia. I don't see it in our federal level elected officials or anywhere else. But at the same time, the country's worth it. And we owe it to the young folks to turn it over in as good a shape or better than we got it. That's every generation's commitment in this country.
Well, General, again, great insights. I can't thank you enough on behalf of our community for what you've shared with us over this past hour. I think your history, your wisdom, your firsthand experience in conflict and sharing with us lessons learned is something I know our community will take away and integrate into our own practices. And I, for one, am going to go back and listen to Crosby, Stills, and Nash and how we traveled down that road with our code. So thank
Alan,
you so very much.
Yeah, can I give one short story here?
Yes, please.
Yeah, over here, right here, you see a picture up on my wall. It's of you can't see it probably, but it's of 29 young sailors and Marines. I'm a 2-star general, and these lads take me all around a place that's just full of fighting. Matter of fact, 17 of them would be killed or wounded around me in 4 months, and I was a 2-star general. I wasn't in the tough fighting. And I pulled into an outpost out in Iraq in the Western Euphrates River Valley about midnight one night. We'd had a rough time getting there. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's designed to keep the foreign fighters coming in from Syria. And something unfolded, and I've never forgotten it, and I share it everywhere I go. The sun came up, and the lieutenant, probably his first tour overseas, comes over to brief me what his 40 sailors and Marines are doing out there to stop the rat line, the line for the foreign fighters to get in from Syria. If they get into Baghdad, a lot of innocent people are going to die. So he's pointing out where he's been fighting, how many troops he's lost. It's a tough area there. Al-Anbar, for those of you who know words like Fallujah and Ramadi. And he said, by the way, we caught a guy laying an IED on the road you came in on last night. Well, that's kind of personal, to be doing something like that. He says he speaks perfect English. He lived for 2 years in London. He's been to school in Switzerland. He's an engineer. You want to talk to him? I said, sure. So they brought him over and he sat down in the dirt next to me. The young Marine cut his little plastic handcuffs off. And we got him a cup of coffee and he about spilled it. It's shaking so bad. It wasn't a good night for him. He's out there with his wheelbarrow and his shovel and putting his artillery rounds in a hole. And he looks up and there's 5 guys with automatic rifles looking at him. And he knows his 401k plan is now in jeopardy big time. I asked him, I said, what are you doing this for? I could tell he was Sunni. I said, you're Sunni. We're the Marines. We're the only friends you've got in this freaking country. Why are you trying to kill us? And he started off on, oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. I said, no, actually, we're not. I pay for the gas every time I pump it in my car. But you're an educated man. You're going to talk like that. Just go away. I don't have time for you. So the Marine stepped forward to take him away, and he said, for a moment, he said, "Can I sit here for a minute, General?" I said, "Okay." And he said, "I just don't like having foreign troops in my country." Okay, I can respect that. I wouldn't want it in my country. So we talked some more about what's going on. He'd been forced out of Baghdad by the Civil War, living out there on the Euphrates, family about 10 kilometers away, wife and 2 daughters and all. And so we talked some more. I got him a cigarette. He wanted one. And he said, right, it was about time for me to be moving on. He could tell I was getting ready to go. And he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I guess I'm going to jail." I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "You're lucky you're not dead for this little stunt. You're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit and orange Abu Ghraib for a while for this." And he said, "General, now I want you all to listen to this." He said, "General, if I'm a model prisoner, do you think someday my family and I could immigrate to America?" Now stop and think about that. He hated us so bad, he was literally trying to kill us. And the power of America's inspiration on its worst day can reach halfway around the world and hit a guy in the heart. And he would give anything to be sitting right where you're at right now. And his daughter is going to school right where you're at right now, right in your town. So we've been through some rough times lately. Keep the faith. We're going to get through it. We'll come back and we're going to be respecting each other, and it's going to work again. We're all going to have to work on it. Nobody, no one man or woman's going to DC to do it. But we can do it, and we need people doing what you're doing. How do we resolve these things? How do we prevent conflicts? And now we need your skill set as much at home as we ever needed it abroad. So good luck to you. I respect what you're doing very much. Again, I signed enough next to kin letters to young widows and mothers and fathers. You do your work, and don't doubt what you're doing and the value of it. Grateful to be here. I'm grateful, Lauren, that you had me come in. Great question, by the way, Alan. You got me thinking on some things here.
Well, thank you, General. And I can say, and I know everybody feels this, you're really one of the reasons that inspiration exists halfway around the world. So thank you so very much for your service and your leadership for our country.
Thanks very much, Jan. Thanks, everybody, and good luck with the rest of your conference there.
Thank you.